Hi, welcome to our Wednesday of Father Bible Study. My name is John. I'm the pastor of First United Methodist Church in Mountain City, Tennessee, and Trade United Methodist Church in Trade, Tennessee. Today is Wednesday, the 14th of September, and I will confess to you that this is a pre-recorded segment. I am currently at a clergy gathering in Johnson City, and just between me and you, why they decided to have clergy gatherings on Wednesday during the day, I'll never know. I mean, that's our traditional day to do Bible studies and stuff. But anyway, gotta go. So, if you have any questions, do go ahead and email me or text me, and I'll be glad to deal with those. Let me share a neat mug with you. This is from Bristol Caverns, Bristol, Tennessee. This was our New Year's trip in 2009, our little family trip with me, Gail, and the girls. For quite a few years, we did a New Year's trip because Christmas was so busy as a pastor. And one year we decided to go to the far-off foreign land of Bristol. And it makes me laugh now because Bristol's where we go shopping. We're serving in that area. And so that's one of the neat things about being a pastor. I've got to experience and live in, be part of different communities. So what was once far off and foreign is now part of our neighborhood. But Bristol Caverns was a cool place. I would recommend it to you. It was not as overly developed or overly commercialized, but still had, paths and steps and handrails and cool things like that. So, yeah, that was a good time. All right, well, today we're going to look at the second chapter of John, and everybody knows about Jesus turning the water into wine. That's pretty much in our cultural memory, Jesus turning the water into wine, but this is where it actually happens in Scripture, so we're going to be taking a detailed look at it. And I will confess to you a bit of discomfort with this text. I am of the South. I am born and raised in Tennessee. My family, it was deep in the Prohibition movement. I have great aunts who were part of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and also had some other folks who did make some unauthorized corn liquor ever so often. But we were raised in the culture, in the religious culture, that alcohol was sinful. And so this passage and other uses of wine in the Scriptures has always caused a bit of discomfort and quite frankly a problem for more than a few Christians. Now, today, we as United Methodists are, we're not opposed to alcohol per se, but as part of our witness in the world, we do, as a part of our social principles, recommend abstaining from alcohol as part of our social witness, and we don't use alcohol as part of our communion service, even though we do say bless the bread and wine. We use grape juice because we don't want anyone to be kept from the Lord's table because they might be afraid of getting alcohol if they're struggling with alcoholism or something like that. We want to make the Lord's table open to everyone. And so this deep-seated linkage between alcohol and sinfulness, really drunkenness and sinfulness, has caused all sorts of problems. There have been more than a few pastors and other church folks who have bent over backwards trying to reconcile what Jesus did here with this idea that alcohol is inherently sinful. Saying things like this was a new wine. That's quoting a different place in the Gospels. It wasn't alcoholic at all. It was just grape juice. And that, brothers and sisters, is nonsense. Let's take a deep breath here. Wine in the New Testament is wine as we know it today, the fermented juice of the grape. And like so many of the things in this world, so many of God's gifts, it is neither good nor bad, but it is that it's goodness or badness lies in how we use it. So we are going to read this text and know that this is just wine like we would understand it today. And this is not grape juice or anything like that. So, John chapter 2, verse 1. On the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour is not yet come." All right, we'll stop right here at the moment. In the ancient world, and, well, not just the ancient world, in smaller communities all over the world, pretty much for all time, weddings are a big deal. They are often the high point of the year's social events. It's a time when the whole community comes together to celebrate and have a good time. And in the ancient world, more so than now, the rules of hospitality were very, very explicit. The hosting family, or families, that could vary some, the hosts were obligated to provide the food and the wine. And running out of either was a pretty serious deal. It showed that they weren't prepared, they weren't generous enough, they didn't want the folks to really have a good time. There was all sorts of negative connotations. So running out of wine was a problem. And it doesn't say why they ran out of wine. Maybe they hadn't quite calculated on enough people. Maybe the people were especially thirsty that day. We don't know. But Mary tells Jesus, "Hey, they're running out of wine." And to our modern ears, his reply, "Woman," especially the way I said it, it sounds kind of harsh. But it was much more of a neutral. It didn't have that same kind of negative connotations. It was just Jesus addressing his mother. "Woman, why is that our problem? Why is that my problem?" Jesus had just been calling his disciples. Jesus' public ministry was just beginning. And so this really wasn't on the agenda, so to speak. Jesus says, "My hour is not yet come. This is not my time," especially with this being the celebration of this other family. Now, verse 5, this is just the quintessential mother move. His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now, standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. So 120 to 180 gallons of capacity. Gallons, that's a lot. And Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the servant called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So, Mary tells Jesus, "Hey, they're running out of wine." Now, at this point in history, I really don't know what Mary's understanding of Jesus, this little baby boy, was. She knew he was a son of God. She was there for the birth. She knew kind of this whole process. But I wonder if she knew the fullness. But she trusted that he would do something. She had this faith that he would fix this. And so, I don't know, she thought he'd send the other disciples, "Hey, go get some more wine and bring it back." But she turns to the servants. She just totally ignores what Jesus says. Turns to the servants and says, "Okay, you do whatever Jesus says." And Jesus, I just can see Jesus, young adult at this point, rolling his eyes, going, "Mom," and then fixing it. And then he takes care of the problem. There's no flashes of lightning. There's no thunder and smoke. There's no pomp and circumstance. He just does it. And once the jars are full of water, he says, "Okay, take some and take it to the chief steward." And now it's wine. Just very quietly, very subtly. I imagine folks later thought, "Who put all the wine in these stone jars? That's weird." But at the time, nobody in the party knew what was going on. The chief steward didn't know what was going on. The bride and groom had no idea. They were occupied. The families had no idea. The only people that saw this miracle were the disciples, and since John the Apostle was there, we get a front row seat. Every time I preach this sermon, and I've preached it quite a bit, I just have to say that how many miracles of God are going on around us that we just don't know, don't see. I mean, we do need to be paying attention. Granted, we've got to be paying attention all the time, and so we can see some of these moments. But sometimes what God is doing doesn't really concern us. That might be a bit of a blow to our ego. But I think that God is all the time doing little things that we may not see, but nonetheless, people are getting blessed by. So the disciples saw, and they believed in him. They believed he had the power to do amazing things. So this is just a very, very quiet miracle, but a profound one, and it's been remembered not just by the Christian community, but by basically all communities. And I think that's not a bad thing. The first public miracle of Jesus was to keep the party going, as someone else once said. I'm stealing that phrase, but it's a good one. The first miracle of Jesus in public was to provide joy for the community, was to enable them to keep on celebrating. And I think that's a good insight into the work of God. Not that God's purpose is to give us a good time, but that God's purposes are always life-giving, people-sustaining, positive things. And that's a good thing for us to remember, that our God cares about the big issues, but about the little issues as well. So the people in the community could enjoy the party, and the family was saved from great embarrassment. And the disciples saw what Jesus did and believed in him. And it's also worth noting that this wasn't just any wine, it was good wine. When God gives gifts, they are good gifts. And we've got to appreciate them. We've got to notice them. We've got to say thank you for them. We always need to be thankful for what God is continuing to do. So this is just a little bit of a quiet snapshot, but it's had a really outsized impact on culture. But I just think it's a beautiful picture of Jesus doing something good, and Jesus being willing to accommodate. Yeah, that's a good word. Willing to accommodate what we ask of him. His mother, he wasn't. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, if they had ran out of wine, it would not have been the end of the world. That family would have been embarrassed. People might have talked about it for a while, but nobody's lives would have been negatively impacted by the wedding reception running out of wine. Although sometimes when you're embarrassed, you wish you could die. But Jesus was moved to act because someone he cared about asked him to. It mattered to them, so it mattered to Jesus. And it's not just his mother. We all have that access to Jesus. We can ask Jesus for things. And sometimes Jesus says yes. And that's a good thing. That God will accommodate our requests, our dreams, our desires. I mean, you can't go asking things that are contrary to the will and plan of God. But he had no problem with helping these people out. It just wasn't part of his agenda again. But he was able to accommodate what his mom asked of him. So I think that's a really good picture of Jesus as someone who cares about what his people are wrestling with, cares enough to give good gifts, and cares enough to give abundantly. I mean, I don't know how big the wedding party was, but 120 to 180 gallons of wine. Somebody did the math on bottles, and it was over 1,000 bottles or something like that. It was a bunch. So I imagine that community had wine for a while, and that's good. That was good for them. Good for them. So Our God is willing to accommodate us. Our God gives good gifts, and our God gives abundantly. So, in this little bitty story, and our God sometimes gives very quietly. We've got to be paying attention. So that's 4 really good lessons out of this little story in the first part of the Gospel of John. I think it reveals a lot about God's nature, really good things that we can celebrate. So I hope that we will appreciate that. And so next week, we'll continue talking about John chapter 2. We'll pick up in verse 12, 2:12, and go on from there. But until then, I hope you guys have a blessed week. Don't forget to shoot me an email or send me a text if you have a question. And I will see you in church on Sunday. God bless. Take care.